Doctor Strange 2 used Doom's tech. Most people walked out of Multiverse of Madness talking about John Krasinski showing up as Reed Richards. But the more important detail might be how he showed up. When Strange is brought before the Illuminati, Reed doesn't walk in with the others. He appears later, standing on a circular platform that materializes him into the room. It looks like a simple teleport effect, but behind the scenes, the production team confirmed that the device was inspired by a specific piece of Marvel tech, the Time Platform. And in the comics, that technology is strongly associated with Doctor Doom. The Time Platform isn't just a fancy teleporter. It's high-level, precision tech tied to time travel and multiversal movement, something Reed usually only builds when Doom's work is part of the equation. It's also connected to early Kang storylines, which makes its appearance even more interesting in a movie that's already dealing with alternate realities. What makes this stand out is the setting. Earth 838 is supposed to be more advanced than the main MCU timeline. So instead of introducing Doom directly, Marvel shows us a universe where technology linked to him already exists and is being used casually by the smartest man alive. That's exactly the kind of indirect setup Marvel likes. Introduce the ideas first, then the character later. It also lines up with how the multiverse saga has been unfolding. Loki establishes variants and timelines, Quantumania brings Kang into focus, and now we've quietly seen Doom-level tech without anyone naming Doom. That doesn't mean Marvel had everything planned from day one. Rights issues alone make that unlikely. But by the time Multiverse of Madness was written, they were clearly planting conceptual seeds. They didn't show Doom. They showed a world already using his kind of technology. And in Marvel storytelling, that usually means the character isn't far behind. Kang hid Doctor Doom. One of the stranger theories going around is that Kang didn't just manage the timeline, he actively kept Doctor Doom out of it. The idea is that Kang knew someone like Victor Von Doom would eventually become a problem. Not just another villain, but a rival. Someone smart enough to challenge the entire multiversal system. Instead of trying to erase him, Kang supposedly did something more strategic. He redirected him. In this version of the theory, Doom doesn't vanish. He becomes Tony Stark. Same level of intelligence, same obsession with control and legacy, same ability to solve time travel. The difference is that Stark's path keeps the timeline stable, while Doom's would have destroyed it. That would mean Iron Man wasn't just a hero who happened to invent time travel. He was a necessary outcome. Kang needed someone to crack time mechanics so the sacred timeline, the TVA, and everything tied to Loki could exist. Fans point to how similar Stark and Doom are in the comics. Two hyper-intelligent figures with massive egos, futuristic tech, and a need to leave a lasting mark on the world. They're often written as mirrors of each other, the kind of characters who can't coexist without clashing. So if Kang kept Doom suppressed by allowing a Stark version to exist first, it explains why Doom only shows up after Tony is gone. There's finally space in the timeline for that other outcome. The darker version of the same potential. It's not confirmed, and it leans heavily into multiverse logic, but it does fit the larger theme of rewritten destinies. If one genius was allowed to live because he stabilized the timeline, and the other was held back because he would break it, then Doom arriving now isn't random. It's what happens when the timeline no longer has Tony Stark to occupy that role. Doombox in Moon Knight Moon. Knight always felt a little disconnected from the rest of the MCU, which is why fans started digging into the background details. In the first episode, when Stephen blacks out and wakes up in that open field, the setting doesn't really look like London anymore. In the distance, there's a small European-style village, old stone buildings, narrow streets, and above it, on a mountain, there's a huge castle overlooking everything. For comic readers, that silhouette looks very familiar. Doctor Doom's fortress in Latveria is almost always shown the same way, towering over a small Eastern European capital, isolated, more like a symbol of control than a home. The framing in Moon Knight is surprisingly close to that imagery. Then there's a blink and you miss it detail during the escape sequence. When Stephen hides and the camera lingers behind him, there's a box with partial lettering that reads Von D. Some fans took that as a hint that he might not be in England at all. He might be somewhere tied to the Von Doom name. If that's intentional, it would mean Marvel seeded the idea of Latveria years before officially introducing Doom, which is exactly the kind of long-game background setup they like to do. It doesn't confirm anything on its own, and the show never acknowledges Doom directly. But the combination of the castle imagery, the unfamiliar location, and that tiny prop detail is enough to keep the theory alive. If Moon Knight really did take a brief detour through Latveria, then Doom has technically been lurking in the background of the MCU for a while. We just didn't know it yet. Mobius told Loki. There's a small line in Loki Season 1 that gets a lot darker the more you think about it. When Loki asks how the TVA decides who gets erased, Mobius casually mentions a past mission near the Black Sea. The target wasn't a warlord or a superpowered adult. It was an 8-year-old boy who was supposedly responsible for thousands of future deaths. Mobius hesitated. Timelines started branching, and Ravonna ended up pruning the child herself. At first, it sounds like a moral story about hard choices, but the TVA doesn't actually prevent disasters. We're told they let wars and mass death happen as long as the timeline stays intact. Their real job is stopping variants that could threaten He Who Remains. So if they erased a child, it wasn't because of the people he would kill, it was because of what he would become. Now look at the details. Eastern Europe, near the Black Sea, a single individual important enough that the TVA intervenes before he grows up. In Marvel lore, that description lines up almost perfectly with Victor Von Doom. Latveria is usually placed in that region, and Doom is one of the few characters whose existence alone can reshape entire timelines depending on whether he rises to power. That makes Mobius' story feel less like a random anecdote and more like a hidden hint. The TVA trying to eliminate Doom before he ever becomes a threat. The timing is interesting too. Loki released while Marvel was still figuring out the direction of the multiverse saga. Looking back now, that throwaway line feels a lot more like early groundwork than filler. If that child really was a future Doom, then the TVA didn't just fail to stop him. They created the reason he would hate them, and the timeline, in the first place. Doom's castle in Loki. When Loki revealed the Citadel at the end of time, most people focused on the Kang reveal. But visually, that structure doesn't really look like something Kang would build. The TVA is all clean lines and retro-futuristic tech. Kang's variants are usually surrounded by machinery, timelines, and advanced technology. The Citadel, on the other hand, feels ancient. Tall stone spires, gothic design, almost medieval. It looks less like a lab and more like a throne room at the edge of existence. For comic readers, that aesthetic feels much closer to Dr. Doom. Doom's castle in Latveria is always depicted as a looming fortress, not just a home, but a symbol of absolute rule. One ruler, one domain, towering over everything else. The Citadel gives off that same energy. Inside, it gets even stranger. The space feels ceremonial rather than technological, and there are two massive hooded statues standing like silent guardians. They're never explained, but the imagery, cloaked, faceless, imposing, lines up far more with how Doom mythologizes himself than with how Kang presents his power. There's also the fact that He Who Remains doesn't treat the Citadel like something he built to rule from. He describes it as a place he ended up waiting in. It's functional for him, not symbolic. That distinction matters because Doom is the kind of character who turns his environment into a statement about himself. His power is always tied to imagery, legacy, and control. So the theory isn't that Doom was secretly living there, it's that Marvel may have already shown us what ultimate authority in the MCU looks like. And it's not sleek, futuristic, or technological. It's a throne in a fortress at the end of everything. And that design language feels a lot more like Doom than Kang. Tony Stark always knew. There's also that Endgame scene that people keep going back to. When Tony travels to April 7th, 1970, he unexpectedly runs into Howard Stark, who's talking about Maria being pregnant. Tony pauses for a second, and fans have been dissecting that reaction ever since. He plays it off with a joke, but there's a clear moment where he looks like something isn't lining up. That brief hesitation has led to a lot of theories. Some people think it's just emotional, others think it hints at a deeper contradiction in Tony's past. I've already broken that scene down in detail in another video, so if you want the full theory and all the timeline implications, Make sure to check that out after this. Stark's nightmare was Doom. Tony's vision in Age of Ultron looks very different after Multiverse of Madness. Originally, it's presented as a nightmare caused by Wanda, a fear projection meant to push Tony toward building Ultron. He sees the Avengers dead, the world destroyed, and Steve telling him he failed. It's chaotic, but it's also very specific, and it changes Tony's entire mindset. From that moment on, he becomes obsessed with control and preventing a future where the team loses. At the time, we were told it was just a hallucination. But Multiverse of Madness introduces a new rule. Dreams are actually glimpses into other realities. When you sleep, you're seeing another version of events happening somewhere else in the multiverse. If that rule applies retroactively, then Tony's nightmare might not have been a fear at all. It could have been a real timeline. One where the Avengers fall and the planet is left defenseless. That's where the Doom theory comes in. A broken Avengers team, a world that loses its protectors, and a threat powerful enough to wipe them out. That lines up far more with a Doom-level event than with Ultron, who was ultimately defeated in the same movie. So the idea is that Tony didn't just imagine a bad outcome. He saw a version of the future that's now becoming relevant. If Doomsday visually echoes that vision, dead Avengers, a ruined battlefield, the sense that they were too late, it wouldn't be a retcon. It would be a payoff to something Marvel showed almost a decade ago. Tony spent years trying to prevent that future. The theory is that he saw Doom coming. He just didn't know what he was looking at. Endgame loose end. Endgame makes time travel sound simple. Return the stones, the branches disappear, everything fixes itself. But the movie immediately shows that it's not that clean. The 2012 timeline with Loki escaping gets handled later by the TVA, so that one's accounted for. But the 2014 timeline is a different story. In that version of events, Thanos leaves and never comes back. Nebula's gone, and Gamora ends up in the main timeline. Even if the Power Stone is returned, that world is permanently changed. That's not a temporary branch. That's a broken reality. And we know from later films that people existing outside their native timelines destabilize things. So either the TVA pruned those worlds off-screen, or they're still out there, fractured and unresolved. Then there's 1970, a trip that wasn't even part of the original plan. Tony meets Howard, Steve sees Peggy, Pym particles get taken, and Steve eventually decides to stay in the past and live a full life. That alone creates a completely new timeline, one that can't be fixed by returning a stone. You can't reset personal choices. So instead of closing the multiverse, Endgame quietly multiplies it. Displaced characters, altered histories, and entire realities left hanging. That matters, because chaos like that doesn't need to be created by a villain. It just needs someone ruthless enough to take control of it, which is exactly where Dr. Doom fits. Not as the one who broke the multiverse, but as the one who steps in and claims what everyone else left behind.